Today we're looking at a little article on pages 143 and 148 of the Sports Illustrated November 20th, 1989 issue. An article that also featured Michigan's famed Run for the Roses and various advertisements for cars of the day. Streaking back at 1,560 miles per hour, recall when slot cars were a kid's fad? Nowadays they are very high-tech and very adult. By Lisa Twyman Bisson. On the same weekend that Emerson Fittipaldi won this year's Indianapolis 500, an international gathering of Fittipaldi wannabes congregated at Grand Raceway in Chicago to compete for another racing title. These drivers had cars that cost only $500, but accelerated from 0 to 60 miles per hour in less than a second, and hit speeds equivalent to 1,560 miles per hour. More on that later. The work done in the pits seemed more like microsurgery than auto mechanics. Welcome to the 1989 Slot Car World Championships, in which 280 drivers from 27 countries competed for $55,000 in prize money. More on that later. The World Championships were bankrolled by Jean-Pierre Van Rossum, an eccentric Belgian financier. Van Rossum, 44, was slot car racing's sugar daddy for the past 4 years, and one reason that the sport regained popularity. He also created quite a stir. On the one hand, Van Rossum is determined to protect slot car racing's traditions from the onslaught of high-tech tampering. On the other, he promotes the sport with all the subtlety of WrestleMania. Suffice it to say that slot car racing is alive and well, but not what it used to be. 20 years ago, slot cars were all the rage, and every town big enough to have a traffic light seemed to have a track. One company alone, American Raceways, built 5,000 mini indies in storefronts and malls. The Wall Street Journal estimated that sales of slot cars and parts reached $50 million in 1966. Then in 1968, there was a tremendous crash, says Ken McDowell, whose company, Parma International, has manufactured slot cars since '68. The sport's growth was just too phenomenal to maintain. I compare it to hula hoops, says Dan DeBella, who owns Pro Slot, another surviving manufacturer of cars and parts. As with so many fads, the market got oversaturated and people got sick of slot cars. Today, there are roughly 500 commercial tracks and 30,000 racers nationwide. But they are not just neighborhood kids these days. Drivers are adults, fluent in techno speak with money to burn. I probably have about $7,000 or $8,000 worth of slot car parts back in my hotel room, said Gary Putz, a product supervisor for Mobil Chemicals in Chicago. Putz holds a single lap record of 2.070 seconds on Grand Raceway's 6-turn, 155-foot bank course. Here I am, almost 40 years old, and I'm still playing with toy cars, says John Myers, an advertising executive who spent his 15th wedding anniversary competing in the Worlds. Grand Raceway, which is in a shopping center 25 minutes west of the Loop, boasts that it is the world's fastest track. Brightly painted cars whine with the sound of dentist drills as they shoot around the wildly twisting circuit. The leaders are listed on a computer screen that's mounted overhead. The fastest cars travel at about 65 miles per hour. That may not sound fast, says Stuart Cofield of Addison, Illinois, who won this year's world title in the 5,000 first prize. Keep in mind that these cars are 1/24th scale. In full-scale terms, the cars are traveling at 1,560 miles per hour. These cars pull 10 Gs, not scale 10 Gs, real 10 Gs. The space shuttle at takeoff pulls 10 Gs. Coford, who runs Coford Engineering, which designs slot cars and does consulting, works for the Defense Department. We just finished investigating the causes of electrical failures in aircraft for the Air Force, says Coford. Our next project is finding an insulating material for night vision glasses. Is it odd that a slot car designer should also design some defense systems? It's all high-tech, says Coford. Everything is simulated on the computers. And what's the biggest difference? When we make a slot car prototype, says Coford, our investment is only a couple thousand. Coford's cars look like origami figures made of plastic. They're built for speed, not looks, he says. Cocked wings hold the 11-inch long cars on the track through the bank turns. But as the car accelerates down the straightaways, the force of air moving over the body flattens the wings, therefore reducing aerodynamic drag. Speed-controlled aerodynamics, says Coford. Not even the Indy cars have tried this trick. For the myriad qualifying heats and time trials at the World Championships, 8 drivers at a time line up along Grand Raceway straightaways, squeezing and releasing controllers that look like power drills without the bits. Heads bob and weave as drivers and spectators follow specific cars around the track. I think driving a slot car is more difficult than real racing, says Martin Grahmann of West Germany. Grahmann is seated in a wheelchair on an elevated platform across from the rest of the drivers. He controls his cars by operating a throttle stick on a console resting on his lap. 10 years ago, Grahmann broke his neck when the Formula 2 car he was driving slammed into a wall. The accident left his hands paralyzed. It's taken me quite a long time to get used to driving like this, he says. Grahmann, winner of the World Championships amateur class, is at Grand Raceways courtesy of Van Rossum, who flew in 100 drivers from as far away as New Zealand and paid their expenses while they were in Chicago. Van Rossum can afford such indulgences. He made millions forecasting economic trends and is reported to have a controlling interest in more than 60 companies. Picasso's hang in his apartment in Brussels. At the 1986 World Championships in Toulouse, France, he awarded a Ferrari, a real Ferrari, $70,000 worth to one of the winners. Rossum admires slot cars modeled after Jaguars and Porsches rather than the high-tech wing cars or what he calls the space-age wedges of Swiss cheese. To preserve the concept of slot cars as scaled-down racers, in 1988, he created the Concours d'Elegance with a $2,500 prize for the best model of a car competing in international racing. Gary Cannell, an English train engineer, won the Grand Raceway Concours with a meticulously scaled-down Jaguar. Le Mans-type races for slot cars were another Van Rossum creation. Though those races usually run closer to 8 hours than the 24 hours of the real thing, he stipulated that both types of cars, the replicas of classic racers and the faster wing cars, share in the prize money in all types of races he sponsored. Then he and DeBella set up Eurotoy, now located in Lowell, Michigan, to market the model slots he was promoting. The pros, only a handful really, didn't like the fact that he was kicking them out of the limelight, says DeBella. Van Rossum's methods have caused others to shy away. To promote a 1987 race in Belgium, he ran a billboard ad throughout Europe that featured a topless blonde. He also delighted in printing National Enquirer-type stories about American racers in the now defunct Euroslot, a magazine he used to publish in Belgium. He has recently announced he will no longer sponsor races involving wing cars. I am not interested in those poor devils, Van Rossum says of wing car enthusiasts. I don't even want my name associated with them. Instead, he will be backing a Belgian Formula One team called Moneytron and is planning to invest an additional $5 million in a new slot car racing series. Wing car organizers are confident that their version of the sport can stand on its own. It was nice to get free plane tickets, said Coulthard, but the sport can survive without Van Rossum. We hold over 100 races a year that have nothing to do with him. To be sure, the future of slot car racing seems to be based on more than a wing and a prayer.